right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. In 1976, 13 visionary women came together to form the CMC to connect people and ideas through community conversation. And literally 49 years later, that conversation is still going very strong. Yes, this is CMC's 49th year, if you can believe it or not, and I certainly believe that deserves a round of applause. I'm Sophia Pfiffner. I'm the president and CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, and thank you so much for those of you who are tuning into our live stream. We greatly appreciate your viewership. We're coming to you from the View Columbus and the Brewery District. And for those in the audience, if you can scan the QR codes at your table, you can learn more about today's forum, take a very short survey, and see the many organizations that support this nonprofit organization every single week. So thank you so much for today's forum sponsors, the Robert Weiler Company. Thank you so much for your continued investment in our organization. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch and the View Columbus. So let's give all of our forum sponsors another round of applause. Thank you so much. All right, so the reason why we're here today, what was America's most popular housing market in 2024? Can you take a guess? You're here. It was Columbus, Ohio. Home sales in Central Ohio were racking up far more online views than the national average, indicating that off-the-chart levels of interest and available properties in this region. With today's experts, we'll dive into the new realities of buying and selling in Central Ohio's red-hot housing market. So please help me welcome today's panelist, Josh Barkin, Division Vice President of MI Homes in Central Ohio. John Melkai, Executive Director of the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio. Buffy Patterson, President of the Columbus Realtors Board of Directors. And our wonderful host, Bonnie Mybers, Commercial Real Estate Reporter with Columbus Business First. Bonnie, welcome back to the CMC podium.
I'm a little taller than Sophia. Thanks, Sophia, and thanks to all of you guys for being here today. Like Sophia said, my name's Bonnie Mybers, and I write about real estate for Columbus Business First. And if you're like me and have tried or somehow actually bought a home in Columbus in the past couple of years, I'm sure you're familiar with the headache that it can be to be living in such a hot market. And I know this is a topic that's top of mind for a lot of people, so I want to just jump right in and hear from our panelists. As Sophia mentioned, and I'm sure you guys know, Columbus topped realtor.com's most popular housing markets list in 2024. Josh, we can start with you. How did we get here? What's driving this? And do you think this will continue into 2025 or continue into this year?
Thanks, Bonnie, and thank you, Sophia, and the Columbus Metropolitan Club for having us all today. This is a really unique conversation at an important time in Columbus as a lot goes on. But, you know, I think Columbus is at a really interesting spot. There's two, I think, major dynamics that are at play right now. The first is Columbus is growing and has jobs and business coming here in a way that hasn't in my lifetime. And I say a lot of times that Columbus, in a lot of respects, has grown up with me. And it's coming and it's exciting and people want to be here and they're considering leaving the coasts and coming to Columbus. And Ohio State students want to stay here as opposed to go to Chicago or New York for maybe the first time. The other side of it is we have a real supply issue, a real inventory problem in Central Ohio. And that is driving prices up. It's driving demand. It's very, very difficult. And we need to overcome that and work through that, which we'll talk a lot about today. But those two things in play make it a really interesting dynamic. I think that it will continue into 25. I mean, none of us are, can predict where rates will go and what else will happen in the economy. But it feels slightly different than last year when things just came out of the new year red hot blazing. But I think Columbus has a ton going for it. And this is MI's home for 48 years. And we are really happy to be headquartered and have a major investment in Central Ohio and look forward. Would bet big on Columbus over the next 5 to 10 years.
John, what do you think?
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me up here today. Morpsey a couple years ago did a study, and it said that 89 people a day are expected to be born or move to Central Ohio for the next 10, 15 years. And I don't think that's going to slow down. And until those numbers change, and make no mistake, we don't want them to change. We want to keep growing because growth in many ways is a first world problem. How we handle it, those are some challenges that I would welcome versus trying to manage a declining population. But while our region continues to grow, housing is going to be a hot topic for us to tackle. And I think it's important for us to put that in context of not just the Midwest, but the state of Ohio, where 60 plus of our 88 counties have lost population. And then you look to the Central Ohio region where population keeps growing. And in many ways, we are, we're growing, but we're growing at really a measured clip. I like to say Columbus is the fast, slow kid in terms of population growth, right, compared to the rest of the state. What we have is a good thing. Population growth is good. Growth is good. How we manage it, though, is going to say an awful lot about us as a region and for us as an industry. So I expect demand to continue because people want to be in this region. They want to be a part of the diverse economy that we have. We're not tethered to one industry. We have options all around. That's going to make us a resilient community. And now it's up to us to meet that challenge of making sure that, as we say at the BIA, a home is where a job goes at night. We've done a really good job of bringing those jobs. We need to focus on making sure that everybody who works in those jobs, whether on first shift, third shift, to have a corner office, or work behind the scenes, that they have a place to live. And that's an exciting opportunity for all of us in this room to be a part of in this region.
I think the only thing that I would add is one of the things we do really well in Central Ohio is partner. And so, we have these organizations here, our builders, our lenders, our community organizations, obviously the realtor organization. We know how to work together to get things done. Housing and housing affordability is a real concern here in Central Ohio, but it is a good problem to have in some ways because there is demand here. I think, Josh, something you talked about earlier, so I grew up in Columbus as well, and so to watch how Columbus has transformed over the past 50 years, phenomenal. Would have never thought that we would look like what we look like today when I was a child. And I can't imagine with all of the industry that is coming into our area, all of the technology that is coming to our area, what we will look like 50 years from now. It will be much different than it is today. And so because we do work well together in community and as organizations, putting those plans together and figuring out the next steps and the best ways and what type of housing people need is really, what we need to do. So.
And I did want to ask you guys, let's start with Buffy, since you're the realtor on the panel. Could you talk about how the typical Central Ohio home buyer has changed over the years? Are they older? Are they from out of state?
Central Ohio, we have our college students who have, decided to stay. But overall, and this is not just within Central Ohio, it is a Central Ohio thing, but it's also a national thing. First-time home buyers are getting older. So the average age now of a first-time home buyer is 38. It was 35 last year, and it's been as low as 26 to 27. Second-time home buyers, on average, are 61 years old now. Used to be 58. So people are coming into this market and they're waiting before they purchase a home. It's interesting, it's the same on the seller side. People are selling later, and people are staying in their homes longer. We are seeing folks come into Central Ohio from places like Tennessee, Chicago, the West Coast, the DC area. And some of those areas, the cost of living is different than it is here. So what we may deem as unaffordable, they think is, a steal. And so that is the other challenge when we have folks coming in from markets that have a higher cost of living than we do. That can also drive up prices here because their expectation is different. And it's an expectation that, obviously we're going to have to figure out how to deal with.
Do either of you guys have anything to add?
Buffy, you hit on it at the end. I mean, it really is, that's another interesting proposition that in the East Coast, you look in Columbus, Ohio, and it's relatively affordable. But for all of us that have lived here for the last 5, 7, 10, 15 years, we have gotten relatively unaffordable against ourselves. I mean, we were zoning a job in Plain City, and a lot of the buyers that buy out there were young Hilliard and Dublin grads that couldn't afford to live in the communities that they grew up in, and then they were moving out a little bit further. And that is really kind of an interesting dynamic in our market and how that goes and where we go out and where can we continue to grow. And it's something we'll continue to monitor in a big way.
I did want to stick on buyers. All over, headlines are being made about institutional investors coming in, buying up properties in neighborhoods. Could you guys talk about who are these institutional buyers? What kind of properties are they looking for, and how are they impacting our market here?
I'm gonna probably get in trouble. So the term institutional investors really become a hot topic in terms of private entities buying up more in the single-family market properties and then putting them out in the for rent market. And I've done a lot of reading, and the BIA, we kind of drown ourselves in reading studies after studies. I would tell you, on a micro level, it could be an issue on a block or a certain street, but on a macro level, our institutional investors in the U.S. hold about less than 3% of single-family homes and properties. So in many cases, what we're seeing is institutional investors being made kind of the boogeyman of the housing market. But here's the reality. Why is the housing market attractive to institutional investors? It's because there's not enough supply out there. So if your goal is to end institutional investors and investment in properties, I think the way to do that would be to allow for more homes to be built. And at that point, you would see rents probably stabilize and decrease, and prices probably stabilize and in some places decrease. And when you do that, it becomes less attractive to quote-unquote institutional investors. Now, I'd also say that in many cases, folks who are buying properties, they are not taking them necessarily. It's not like they're taken out of inventory. They are still in the market for circulation and for rent, and that's something to keep in mind, whether it's a rental property owned by, I think most rental properties in the United States are owned by people who own 3 or less properties. That's a vast majority of rental property ownership in the United States. So it is a hot topic, and in a tight housing market, that is clearly something that people talk about, and I think institutional investors may be the only other business in the United States that is less popular with the general public than Congress or developers. And so I think that is just, the facts would say on a macro level, it is not a significant issue, and what we should be focusing our attention on is supply, supply, supply.
On that supply topic, could you talk a little bit about, from the builder's perspective, what's causing us to not be able to build enough homes, or is it labor, material costs, other things?
Yes, absolutely. And this is what John and I spend most of our time working on. I mean, I put it in two big buckets, is zoning, land use issues, and infrastructure issues in Central Ohio. And you know that and there are different issues in different places. Some have really good zoning, but some have real challenges on the engineering and infrastructure side. Some have pretty good infrastructure, and they have real challenges on the zoning side. So the state of Ohio is what's called a home rule state, and there's, I mean, there's 40 zoning jurisdictions within the greater Central Ohio area. In Indiana and Indianapolis, the unincorporated areas of the county are zoned at the county level as opposed to the township level. And that is a challenge. And it gets so micro, it's very hard to see the greater good and go. The other hand is the infrastructure. If you look out east in Licking County, it's just the inability to have central sewer and to drag sewer somewhere. For a long time and historically in Columbus, we grew because Columbus provided sewer. The suburban ring around 270, the Gahannas, New Albany's, Worthington, Westerville, Hilliard, Dublin, Grove City, Pickerington are all sewered by the city of Columbus. As Columbus has stopped annexing and stopped being a central provider of sewer service outside of that, it's become real challenging. And where does it go? Delaware County, the county has a really strong sewer program, but they're very divided because the zoning is much harder, but you can get sewer there. In these other places, you start to see Madison County going to a regional level. Marysville plays in a regional sewer level, but it's still very, very challenging. And I think if we can make strides, we have to make strides. If we don't make strides in those two areas, it will be very hard to keep up. And then at the risk of going on too long, the last thing I will add is, I certainly see housing as a spectrum, from true government subsidized affordable housing on one hand and $1 million homes on the other. And where we are lacking the most right now is middle class workforce housing. And when you don't have that housing, everything else gets compressed. The people that are in a government subsidized house doesn't have the ability to move out and move into a 80% AMI apartment, into a market rate, and ultimately buy a home. And you start to see houses around the community here that should really be at X are X times 1.5, and it doesn't make sense. So at MI, we believe we serve the workforce pretty broadly, but we need to be able to do more, and zoning and infrastructure. I'm sure there's a lot of little things that can help do it in a go, and we need all of that. But those are the two big buckets. I think that if we can't make progress in versus our peer cities and states, we're going to find ourselves really behind, and housing is going to get really expensive really fast if it hasn't already.
I think there's kind of, there's two conversations and they're tied together. One is zoning and approval of homes, and two, what it does to the cost of the homes that we buy. Josh and I were looking at a report this week. The average new construction home in Central Ohio is now over $500,000. Single family home, $500,000. When you look at Nashville, we're more expensive than them. When you look at Raleigh, more expensive. Cincinnati, significantly more expensive. And Josh mentioned Indianapolis. If you drive 3 hours west of here, Indianapolis, by almost all accounts, is a peer market. Center of the state, state capital, a lot of similarities demographically to the Columbus region. They're going to close the year, and these are preliminary numbers, building about 3,000 more single-family homes than we built at a cost of just under $400,000. So it's $100,000 more to buy here. And then for your existing market, an existing home in the Central Ohio MSA, roughly, and Buffy would probably know these numbers better than I do, but you're in the upper 200s right now, close to 300,000.
335 and 360.
335 and 360 for an existing home. Indianapolis, you're in the 280s, 270s. And that should send smoke signals up to absolutely everybody, because it makes it more difficult to recruit and retain talent here and to build. And what it is we're not building enough, and what we are building, we're not maximizing our land usage in a way that can meet the housing demands that are out there. We can't do that without local government partners. And you know, yes, there's some changes that need to happen at the State House. I'm very skeptical of changes in Washington, D.C. helping us build more homes in Columbus, Ohio in the short term. This is on us. And, you know, Buffy talked about our collaborative nature in Central Ohio to start. I think that's where it's going to take. And can we get communities to say, yes, we're going to accept more housing and diverse housing? Because there are communities that will accept certain types, but not all types. And they're like, yeah, hey, put that in Columbus. We're good over here. And that's the wrong way to look at housing. We don't want to get into, one of the great things about this region is affordability and accessibility historically. And we don't want to lose that. And we're getting into scenarios where people have to drive to qualify. And that poses a threat to us. So we've got to pick up the pace on our permits. We should be building between 17 and 19,000 homes a year. We're going to be around 11,000. And that's been a persistent 6,000 to 8,000 home deficit for more than a decade. And that has to change.
The only other thing I would add is I do believe, and you all can tell me if I'm wrong, but materials costs have gone up significantly since the pandemic. Additionally, there is a shortage of good labor. So there's a shortage of labor, period, and then there's a shortage of skilled labor. And so I think that those things also contribute to the increases. To your point, John, we do need to be a little more creative about how we find solutions to some of these issues. I think the introduction, and there's conversations that are happening, are starting to happen here in the state around like accessory dwelling units. So utilizing a garage, an attic, adding a structure to your home and having it be a separate dwelling is a possibility, but people just have to kind of be open to not what we're used to. Everybody can't live on an acre. We got to figure something else out.
But, you know, an interesting kind of example of that would be basements. Historically, Central Ohio was a basement-led market where everybody had a basement. But if you look at some of the markets like in Indianapolis, a lot of homes built on slab on grade, so no basements. And we're starting to see more of our new construction products move to that. Builders are really good at designing the houses now, plenty of storage. I lived in the South for a while as a kid. Nobody has a basement in the South. People seem to be okay. Maybe we just need to declutter our houses a little bit and get rid of, but that's an example of changes that we're starting to see for affordability purposes in the market.
John, you're exactly right. This slab has become new. AMI had not built slab homes in Columbus, Ohio, and I don't maybe ever, but many years, and we are doing that now. We hadn't really built townhomes in a meaningful way, attached townhomes, and we're doing that now because it brings the price point and gets people in. But Buffy, you started to touch on it. The one thing, I said, we need to make zoning change. What does that mean? I mean, the first step in that is embracing this concept of density. Density cannot be seen as a four-letter word. We need to embrace it. And in most of our surrounding areas, we're building at 1 to 2 units per acre, which is incredibly low. I mean, most people would say, oh, Grandview or Bexley, you like those areas. I mean, those as a whole are 4, 5, 6 units to the acre. In a lot of respects, there's more houses between downtown and Bexley than there are in huge swaths around in the ground in the surrounding area. And if we can't do that, it's going to be very challenging to overcome, because density isn't bad. It doesn't necessarily mean more clutter. It means you're using your land more efficiently and building things to the market.
You guys have all touched on zoning and policy changes. Columbus recently updated its zoning code. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see that maybe impacting housing supply or the ability to bring more houses online.
I think it's an important first step, but I want to be clear, it's a first step. And I think less than 10% of the parcels in the city were actually rezoned. But Columbus, having not updated its zoning code since the Eisenhower administration, I think probably a good step. And I think it was important to focus on the corridors. You have Link Us that passed in the fall. There's a lot of good momentum around there, but it can't stop. And it can't stop because, again, what was zoned was very few ultimately parcels in the city. So when the rest of the city is unlocked and for housing creation and modernized, I think that's where we're really going to see improvements in the city. And it's not just around High Street, not just around Broad Street. I think there's clearly a need for housing in those areas, but unlocking development and kind of the auxiliary corridors is where we're really going to see housing creation picked up. And when you look at communities like, Minneapolis gets a lot of love because they eliminated single-family zoning and around their city, and that was great. But I think even when you talk to folks in Minneapolis, they would tell you what really did it was changes around the city, which made it easier to build different types of housing and along some of their thoroughfares and maximizing their land. So it was a huge first step, but there's a long way to go. My fear is, great, we did step one, okay? We cannot wait for step two. We cannot allow ourselves to be so happy that we did step one. Let's go to step two. Let's not wait. There's no reason to wait. We know what needs to happen. We just did this. Let's go. Let's get this done for the entire city, because I think there are parcels and property owners and people who'd like to do some really great projects all around town, and they need to have the same, that ability afforded to them that was afforded to people in the corridors.
I agree. I don't have anything to add to that.
Same. Me too.
Not to pick on you, John, but you also mentioned, and feel free to jump in, Josh and Buffy, but, state policies, some sort of policy change could maybe unlock housing for other folks. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I think the state could do to make housing creation easier and more productive. So just a couple of things right off the top. Josh touched on infrastructure. We need to appropriately fund infrastructure in the Central Ohio region and across the state because it's cost prohibitive for people to build new communities. When I started with the BIA, I had no idea that I would spend this much time thinking about sewer, but I do, and that's one of the most critical factors that developers face is if they can't connect to a sewer system and water system, the house doesn't get built. How do we do that in a growing region? Some of this is reform. Josh touched on this earlier about the difference between other states and Ohio. We have said that in most other states, townships don't zone. They do here. That's a challenge, not one that we actually agree with. We think it should be done at the county level. But let's remove that from the equation and say you're not going to remove township zoning. We are one of two states that allow referendum on zonings in the way that we do. One of two. The other is West Virginia. We're the only two states that operate the way that we do that. In communities, they can put a zoning project on the ballot and then vote it down. They never pass, never, in the development housing creation favor. They are almost always overturned. So what you have is, we talk about elected officials making tough decisions on housing. In some communities, those officials take a tough vote and say, this is important, we want this housing. And then residents, and sometimes led by people who don't even live in those communities, get ballot petitions together, and they vote down the housing development. Just as a personal level, I don't know that in the last days of your life that you want to say, man, one of my greatest accomplishments was preventing somebody from having a house. But you go out, you guys, they do you. We need to change that. I think there are other programs and things that we need to do to expedite zoning and annexation reform. Those are all things that need to happen, and Ohio is a little outdated on. Again, I don't think this is malicious by people at the State House. I think what we have is a scenario where our region is growing and facing different challenges than some of our legislators from the other 88 counties are. So it's our job to educate them and get them to understand. I will tell you, I talked to the Ohio Mayor's Alliance and the Municipal League, and I had heard this. They said, well, housing's a uniquely Central Ohio problem, one of the speakers at the conference. So then I got up and I said, well, show of hands, how many people think housing's an issue in your community? Every one of them. We have more than, I think, 60% of the houses in the state of Ohio were built before 1950. Sometimes old's historic, and sometimes old is old. And we need to change. We need to incentivize development in areas around the state where maybe traditionally they've been left behind in terms of new housing creation. We can do that. Those are a handful of things that could happen at the State House.
I think the only thing I would add is, as an organization, we do have an advocacy arm, and at the local level, we are in very close contact with Columbus City Council, as well as the other city councils within our region. And at the state level, we have a government affairs director who is at the State House daily. And so we're aware of these issues, and we are constantly raising these issues to try to get legislation passed that will help move things forward.
I'd say one other thing, and you started to go there, John, that the state can help with is, some of these small communities, I get it. It's challenging to think that they may have had 1,000 residents before MI shows up in the neighborhood or Intel gets dropped in your backyard, and you don't have a planner, you don't have the money to even put a plan in place. I get that. I mean, that's hard. How do you do that? You feel like you're just getting bombarded. But that's where I think the state can help incentivize as well, that if you can adopt certain planning policies, you'll hold to certain density requirements, that there should be money available to help on those things, to help through growing pains, because you're in a small community. I was on a panel with Councilman Hardin a few months ago, and his job is very, very hard. But when you go down to Columbus City Council, first of all, you got to be willing to drive down there, park around the corner, come inside. It's intimidating. You're on TV. You can't really get close to anybody. And it's hard to go speak up there. In most of the places I'm in a zoning meeting is a 20 by 20 room that may have a total of 1,500 residents. On Friday night, the planning commission member and the resident will be at the local bar or pizza place together next to each other, and it's their friend and neighbor. I mean, even the strongest leader, that is hard leadership. And we have to find a way to bridge that and to give people the tools to educate their constituents and help them stand up. And, a lot of times you won't see even the area commissions in Columbus. There's no legal counsel there. There's no one from the city attorneys, and a lot of respect that is there. And so if a neighbor comes in really fired up, he can almost say and do whatever he wants, and there are effectively no rules, because it's just a colleague trying to control it. And that is a really tough way to make progress in housing. And so I think the state, by helping make it not feel so micro and so local and incentivize that and give these places the tools, can really take a step forward.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you all. It's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. We'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences here in a minute. So if you have a question, you're here with us in the room, make your way over to Doug at the microphone over there. If you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. But before we take audience questions, I did have one more question for you all. And Josh, we'll jump back to you. Where do you see Central Ohio's housing market in the next 5 or 10 years? Are we going to see a correction? Are we going to remain red hot? What do you think?
Well, despite our, John and my and Buffy, that we need more. I've been talking to a few people recently and candidates looking to work for MI and working in Columbus. And, there is no other city in the Midwest that I would bet on over the next 10 years. I think we will continue to grow. We have great schools, we have great health care, we have great talent. We're proximate to so many things. Our weather is not great right now, but is relatively mild, and we really have a lot to champion. And as a younger person that started my family here, I mean, there's no other community, certainly in the Midwest and maybe even the country, that I'd want to raise my kids. And I think that it hopefully will loosen up. I hope that it stays red hot because people continue to want to be here, not because we have supply issues. And my advice is, I mean, if you buy a house, I mean, until we figure out the supply issues, prices are only going up. And I'd buy now and bet on Columbus.
Buy now. Seriously, though. So you use the term red hot. I do think the market will continue to be very strong and positive in the Columbus and surrounding area. I do not want it to be red hot, though, believe it or not. Hot, but not red hot. The reason for that is in a red hot market, it makes it very difficult for buyers. They have to give up everything. I can't get an inspection. I can't get anything repaired. I can't ask for a home warranty. It's not a comfortable place to be if you're on the buy side when you're in a red hot market. Prices are going up, and you are literally required to be responsible for everything. And the seller can dictate the terms of any of the agreement that you reach. So I want it to be hot, but I don't want it to be red hot. And I think things are, with the interest rates having increased slightly in the past year or so, do think, based upon what our economist is saying, we should see a leveling out of that, and we'll end up somewhere in the range of like 5.75 to 6.75, that point difference. I think we're going to see more people entering the market. When interest rates were up, people were scared to kind of get out there and buy because they were used to 2, 3, and 4%. I don't see us going back to 2, definitely not 2, 3, or 4%. And so we kind of have to get used to, this is the new normal in terms of the interest rates. If we can get that supply out there, it's just going to help balance everything out for everybody. So.
The only thing I'd add is we've got to, this is a choice, and the region has to make a choice. And I hope that we make a choice in favor of creating more housing so people have more housing options. I want my kids to have the option to live in Columbus. And, I hope that we provide them that opportunity and they're not forced to go to another community to try to find a place to start their lives.
Thank you, guys. And now Doug Buchanan with CMC is curating questions from our live stream audience. And you already have a line behind you of people here in the room. So Doug, what's our first question?
Bonnie, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. Great conversation. If you have a question for today's panelists, please do join us here at the microphone. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can with our remaining time. If you're watching online, type your question into the chat on YouTube. Those are being sent to me, and I'll try to get to as many of those as I can. As you ask a question here at CMC, we always have 2 rules for questions at CMC. They take less than 30 seconds to ask. And what punctuation mark does a question end in? It ends in a question mark. Thank you. All right, I'll start us off with this one from Steve Swift. How is the building industry prepared to deal with the incoming administration's promises of mass deportation when it comes to the labor needed to continue building new residential inventory?
I'm going to let John answer that.
I got a call about this before the election from a national reporter asking the same question, and I think, I think I've heard some of our builders say, we should put a trade school right on the border, and embrace folks who are here to make a living and to build our communities. I'm not sure that we'll actually see mass deportations off of job sites in the way that the question was asked. But I will tell you that when you look historically at construction companies across the United States, they often have ethnic names or immigrant names, whether they were Irish or whether they were Italian, or whether now they're Hispanic. Our industry has always embraced newcomers to this country who want to work and want to be a part of a great industry, and we're going to continue to do that. And I guess our folks and our subcontractors do everything they can to make sure that folks are, doing everything appropriately in the right way. So let's hope it doesn't come to that. We need to embrace people working and who are here to build a life for themselves and their families.
Karen Huff, founder and CEO of Improv Edge. We provide consulting, training, and coaching for executives around the world. So I also love data, and Buffy, you mentioned the next 50 years. And what I have been watching for quite a number of years now is what's happening to our world as we see LA and the rains and other places. We find that Columbus in Central Ohio is actually going to be a very safe place and continues to be so, which says that we will probably be a target for climate refugees. So my question is, there are a lot of impacts that could suddenly come upon us like that. And how do you see that impacting our housing market? Thank you.
So that's a great question that I do not have the answer to. But I mean, realistically, if you think about the fact that we are already an attractive region, we do already house and have housed refugees for other reasons in the Central Ohio area, is something I guess that we're going to have to take into consideration. And I'm a planner by nature, and so I actually appreciate the question because it gives us something else to think about as we are planning for the future as an organization. We have an opportunity to have refugees here who are impacted by the environment. And what does that look like for Central Ohio? So I appreciate the question. I don't have the answer.
I think for that issue specifically, I think of a couple things that come to mind that probably doesn't answer your question, but that we should be thinking of. The development community and the environmental community have always had an interesting relationship. And I will say this, as this growth continues to come, Josh used the term density. I've been at the BIA 7 years, 1 month, week or so, and the amount of times I've seen somebody from the environmental advocacy community show up at a project and ask for more density is 0. Okay, so if we want to preserve our green space and we want to preserve our natural resources, density is a way to do that while accommodating growth and maintaining housing affordability. So I hope that community, and we're starting to see a change a little bit. We need to start seeing the environmental community advocate for responsible housing options and densities that are appropriate for our region. And the other thing I would add is we also need to be careful, though, of our built environments and I guarantee you that a new home built is probably going to perform better from an energy efficiency standpoint than an older home. They just will. But sometimes our elected officials get so bent on trying to do things, they make it more expensive to build the new stuff to try to make up for mistakes of the past. We need to incentivize restoration and renovation of our older properties, but not make it punitive on new construction to try to make up for the wrongs of the past.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. Speaking of density, Julia Keckstein asks, Bobby Schottenstein has been preaching density for years. Which community is listening and acting?
I defer all MI Homes questions to Josh.
Well, I'm glad they phrased it like that. At least one of his employees is listening. So, there's a couple examples. First of all, Columbus has started to embrace density, at least more so than the surrounding areas. That may not be that it's great or anything, but Columbus, at least now when you're down there, the discussion is less about is it 3, 4, 5, or 18, 20, 26 units to the acre, and has started to embrace that. I think Reynoldsburg is a really good example of somebody that in the last 5 or 6 years had the desire, had the initiative to undertake a revamp of their zoning code. And they did it, and it's really worked. I mean, we've had 2 great jobs, one really recently in the last 60 or 80 days, may have even read about it in Business First, that was approved out there, and the process was fast, was seamless. We knew what we were there, and again, we don't try to change the rules. We just need to know what the rules are and how to get through it. It's when there's gray area and things change and people have different discretions that can delay 60, 90, 120 days. I mean, that makes a real difference, because think if you're a property owner that you want to sell and MI is telling you, well, I need 2 years of time and I'm not really going to give you anything until the end of that because I'm spending a lot of money to see if I can even get something done. That's a tough pill to swallow as a property owner. So I'd say that those are some decent examples, but other places need to really kind of keep going on that front.
My name is Brian Urbanski, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Ivory Affordable Housing Foundation. And as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, homelessness is a continual problem, and you can't have a conversation about housing without addressing that issue. And we support a lot of folks on the lower end of the economic scale, and clearly the number one answer is abundant new housing, which is the challenge that we're all trying to overcome here in this industry. But in the meantime, what can we do to continue affordability in the traditionally workforce housing areas that we have on the east side, the west side, and the south side, to prevent these folks on the lower end of the economic spectrum from being priced out of having a home, whether it's buying a home or renting it?
Well, a thought that I have is it would be great if, and it doesn't matter if it's city, county, state, or federal, if there were some types of incentives given to help these homeowners if they own and live there, if they're owner occupants, or homeowners who may be providers of housing for people who have this need, to incentivize them to be able to fix these homes up, so to bring them up to a level that they're safe, that people feel comfortable living there, that they have a place that they can call home, whether renting or, if they're the owner of that home. Right now, often what happens, and, whether it's taxes, whether it's your mortgage payment going up due to interest, whatever the case may be, costs are going up overall. And so if you find yourself in a neighborhood where the things around you are changing in a positive way, but you're on a fixed income, you don't have the ability or the opportunity to be able to bring your home up to that level, it would be great if there were some incentives, some programs that would, across the board, help people to bring that housing up as a landlord or as a owner occupant. There are a number of homes that are empty in our community. They're vacant properties. Wouldn't it be great if there was some way to incentivize people to bring those homes to market so that they would be affordable and that we would not have people who were housing insecure?
And I think that those programs are really important, especially in the short term. I think something specific, certainly real estate taxes are really, really high in Ohio compared to some of our sister states. Certainly we fund schools, which you'll go down a rabbit hole, but real estate taxes is hard. But the one thing that I will say that those programs in a lot of respects are really good, really important, but it's a Band-Aid. We need scale. We need to build more housing, and we need to embrace these other things, because without it, you're just going to be trying to get one property owner, 2 property owners, 15 property owners. But we need everybody to get there. One example, this is a personal example. My wife and I had a house over in Old Oaks, right by Children's Hospital, and we were redoing it, and because it was in the historic district, it was required to have wood windows. So you have to understand, if we build a $1 million home at MI, it doesn't have wood windows. But the wood windows versus a vinyl window is a $35,000 difference. So that house in Old Oaks that should have been selling for $210 is now automatically $250 just to cover that cost. You can't make progress. You can't get people relief when that's what they're up against in the neighborhood they've been in. So I think we really have to, big picture, I mean, certainly have the programs do that, but we have to find a way to have more supply in our market.
And I do think addressing some of the vacant housing would definitely take care of that. And to your point, I just had to put a slate roof on a house. It cost me $100,000. Crazy. And nothing else is done, just the roof.
Glad that's not my house. So we have 5 minutes left. We're going to try to get to 2 questions.
Thank you so much for such a good program today. I am Amy Claiborne. I'm president and CEO of Families Flourish. And we use housing as a vehicle for economic mobility, new model, and it's working. So my question for you is, how can we include incentives, or what is needed to have incentives to build housing that's not just more density, but mixed income neighborhoods where people of all incomes can thrive together? And I just have one thing I want to add. We talked about the role of the state. The state provides lots of tax incentives for economic development, so do municipalities. How do we advocate for tax incentives whenever there's one for economic development, for infrastructure and housing development too? We separate them so you get the economic development, but not the housing. So thank you.
It's like you're reading my legislative agenda. That is it's a huge point that I think the state needs to tackle. You know, everybody was so. Especially if you think of economic policy coming post-Great Recession, where it was just a flourish of activity to bring jobs, and then we'll figure it all out. But we just got to get the jobs here. And One Columbus and Jobs Ohio have done a really good job with that. But now the next step, how do you make sure that we can have a workforce where it's not a luxury to live a 20-minute drive to your place of employment? We know every 10 minutes you get outside of that 20-minute drive, an employee becomes less sticky with their job and more likely to find something new. So living close to your place of employment should not be a luxury afforded to C-suite executives. I think that there are definitely things that you could say. I would like for communities to say, we're going to bring this massive project to your region, or this small boutique project that's going to bring in a lot of revenue, but here's what we're going to need from you. There should be a quid pro quo if our tax dollars are used. And you know, again, I started out with that, where homes are where jobs go at night, and that needs to be as much of a focus of economic development as just bringing the job to the region. We need to think about the employee as much as we think about the job.
Thanks, John. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'm getting the wrap it up signal. So we're going to turn it back over to Sophia.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bonnie. I really appreciate your questions today. I hope that everyone found today's conversation incredibly exciting and insightful. I learned so much about our housing market and also the questions from our audience. I love when people ask such diverse questions because it always takes the conversation one step deeper. So I would like to thank today's sponsors, the Robert Weiler Company. Thank you so much for being here. The Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and most importantly, our live stream partners, the Columbus Dispatch and the View Columbus, for making this happen. We are so incredibly thankful to them, but most importantly, we're thankful to each of you. So let's give them one more round of applause. Josh Barkin, John Malachi, Buffy Patterson, and our host, Bonnie Mivers. Thank you. All right, so we have a lot of exciting topics at the CMC every single week, and I am very sorry if you have not already purchased your ticket for next week's conversation that is at the View. We are sold out. It is the Central Ohio Hospital CEO Roundtable, but you can still buy virtual seats. So feel free to do that and join us online because we couldn't do these conversations without each one of you. Thank you so much for being here and have an amazing afternoon.